Welcome to the third part, the final part of our exploration of the character of Sheila Birling. Now it's an index of her, a measure of her character development from petulant capitalist to informed socialist that she is able to utter in the middle of the play. We're not the same people who sat down to dinner. And as I've suggested in earlier videos, Sheila is a real shining success story as far as the inspector is concerned. By confronting her with the horrific consequences of her callous, self-interested behaviour, her sin of jealousy, he has managed to convert her to socialism. So Sheila now cares more about people than profits, cares more about community than the self. There's a great quote by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde talks about the shallow mask of manners. And certainly we see the Birlings are greatly preoccupied with appearances, the shallow mask of manners. They seem to think that if they abide by the rules of etiquette, they're somehow superior to other people. But of course this play exposes their sins, their vice, and shows that they're no better than the working class that they denigrate so readily. Sheila recognises the superficial nature of manners, of abiding by social etiquette, and she says to the family later on in the play, "We've no excuse now for putting on airs." And then she goes on to list the Birlings' crimes, the sins that they've committed. Indeed, later on she calls Mrs. Birling's callous rejection of Eva, when Eva was crying out for charity, she calls it cruel and vile. So this is a woman who's learned to see through that polished veneer of civility and see the seething, pulsing sin that resounds at the core of the Birling family. And she's not impressed. She goes on to attack her parents in Act 3 when she realises the unswerving self-interest that still manages to characterise Mr. and Mrs. Birling's behaviour, even after the inspector's left with his haunting finger-wagging message. "You don't seem to have learned anything," she shrieks at them. They have not learned to treat the poor with respect and humanity. They have not learned that sin and self-interest have horrific consequences, unlike their daughter. Like her brother Eric, Sheila realises that it's completely irrelevant whether Inspector Gould was a proper cop or not, whether he was a real police inspector. Because Gould exposed moral crimes, not legal ones, and he's highlighted the family's need to be more caring and community-minded. Sheila gets this in a way that her parents do not. It doesn't much matter now, of course, but was he a police inspector? She also says he inspected us all right. So he interrogated the Birling family. Didn't matter they didn't have a cap and badge. His function was to expose their guilt and shame and sin. And, you know, you don't need to have shuffled out a police academy to achieve that end. Sheila then, in Act 3, is ready to accept her social responsibility, ready to accept her responsibility for her role in Eva Smith's horrific death. "Between us, we drove that girl to suicide," she says. Quite unequivocally, that is stating her opinion that she and the rest of the Birling family are responsible for this working class girl's grisly demise. When Sheila's asked why she won't go back to merrily subjugating and denigrating the working class, she says, I remember how he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish." This is a reference, of course, to the inspector's parting words. And it just shows that, in a sense, Sheila has been scared into socialism. The powerful, grisly imagery conjured up by the inspector has forced her to reject right-wing, self-interested politics and very much align herself with a more left-wing, community-orientated approach, socialism. To conclude then, our Sheila is a very well-rounded character. She develops into somebody who realises her moral duty to put community before self-interest. She rejects capitalism, you know, that exploitation by the wealthy, and she embraces socialist values. She's scared into socialism by Gould, who makes her see the horrific consequences of self-interest. Now, it's significant that Sheila is drawn from the younger generation. Let's think about this. This play was written in 1945, set in 1912, written in 1945, just after Britain won World War II. And Britain, of course, had to start rebuilding itself, physically, but also in kind of like ideological terms, in terms of the values the country was going to adopt going forward. The younger generation, Sheila's generation, will be the ones shaping Britain's future. And Priestley, I think, sees it as imperative that they embrace socialism to make sure that Britain, going forward, is a fairer society. And perhaps you could argue, with the birth of the welfare states, national insurance, pensions, NHS, a greater sense of social responsibility for the plight of the poor, a move away from laissez-faire government, you could argue that perhaps Priestley was successful in his endeavour of steering the country towards a more left-wing, benign, socialist mentality. And that, in a nutshell, is Sheila Birling.